An arrogant sergeant slapped the quiet man, thinking he was just another face in the crowd. He was wrong. The man he just assaulted wasn't just anybody, he was the one who wrote the book on law enforcement. The late afternoon sun baked the asphalt of the Los Angeles suburb, casting long, distorted shadows. Steven Seagal emerged from the automatic doors of a generic supermarket, the plastic bag in his hand weighing next to nothing. Dressed in worn jeans and a plain gray Henley that didn't hide the formidable architecture of his shoulders and chest, he moved with an economy of motion that was almost unnerving. He was a ghost from a different era, a time of disciplined action and silent professionalism, now adrift in a world of noise and chaos. To the casual observer, he was just a large, aging man with an intense gaze, trying to navigate the mundane. But the way his eyes scanned the street, cataloging reflections in shop windows and noting the rhythm of pedestrians, told a different story. It was a story written in decades of high-stakes operations and countless hours of devotion to the unyielding principles of Aikido. Across the street, Sergeant Kovic watched from his patrol car, a thick arm resting on the open window. The medals on his uniform, earned in foreign deserts, were a point of pride and, in his mind, a license. He saw himself not as a peacekeeper but as a warrior holding a thin line. His partner, Officer Miller, a rookie barely a year on the job, fidgeted with the air conditioning vents, sensing the familiar, ugly tension coiling in the driver's seat. When Kovic saw Seagal, all he registered was a man who looked too calm, too self-contained. It was a look he interpreted as defiance. "Watch this," Kovic grunted, swinging the car door open. He didn't wait for Miller, who sighed and reluctantly followed. Kovic intercepted Seagal at the crosswalk. "Hold on there, friend. Let's see some ID." His voice was a gravelly baritone accustomed to unquestioning obedience. Seagal stopped, his presence a sudden island of stillness in the flow of foot traffic. "Is there a problem, Sergeant?" His voice was low, resonant, and devoid of fear. "You fit a description," Kovic lied, his eyes narrowing. He stepped closer, invading Seagal's personal space, a classic intimidation tactic. "What's in the bag?" "Groceries," Seagal answered, not moving a muscle. From behind, Miller stammered, "Sarge, he just came from the market. We saw him." "I wasn't talking to you, Miller," Kovic snapped without turning his head. He gestured impatiently. "The ID. Now." Seagal slowly reached for his wallet, his movements deliberate. "This is unnecessary." That was the trigger. For Kovic, any pushback, no matter how minor, was a challenge to his authority. Without warning, his open hand swung, and the sound of the slap was like a gunshot in the humid air. It was sharp, clean, and brutally disrespectful. The street fell silent. A woman gasped. Miller flinched back as if he'd been the one struck. Seagal's head barely moved, but his eyes, now fixed on Kovic, seemed to darken, to draw in all the light around them. The plastic grocery bag crinkled in his fist. "You learn to show some respect," Kovic snarled, chest puffed out, high on the adrenaline of his petty tyranny. He reached for his cuffs. "You're under arrest." Resisting. He grabbed Seagal's wrist, intending to twist it behind his back and force him to the ground. It was the last mistake he would make that day. What happened next was not a fight, it was a physical equation being solved. In one fluid, unbroken motion, Seagal used Kovic's own momentum against him. He pivoted, redirecting the grab into a textbook Irimi nage, the entering throw. Kovic's feet left the ground. For a split second, the decorated sergeant was airborne, his face a mask of pure shock, before he crashed onto the pavement. His nightstick clattered away, spinning across the concrete. The crowd, which had frozen, erupted. Phones, already in hand, were now raised, recording. Miller stared, his mind unable to process the seamless, devastating efficiency of the takedown. "You're done." Kovic wheezed from the ground, his face crimson with rage and humiliation. "I own this precinct. Seagal stood over him, not with aggression, but with the profound disappointment of a master craftsman looking at a flawed tool. He adjusted his shirt, picked up his dropped groceries, and calmly walked to the curb. He took out his phone and dialed a single number from memory. A voice answered instantly. "It's me," Seagal said, his voice level. It happened. Within an hour, the digital wildfire was raging. The grainy cell phone videos, uploaded from a dozen different angles, became a singular, viral event. They were raw, undeniable, and utterly compelling. News outlets, smelling blood, slapped sensational headlines on the clips. Hashtags like #KovicTheBully and #TheQuietMan exploded across social media, with millions of people watching the arrogant sergeant's public humiliation on a loop. The internet, for once, had a clear hero and villain. While the world speculated, Steven Seagal was in a sterile conference room in a downtown skyscraper, looking out over the sprawling city. The door opened and Deputy Chief Eva Rostova entered. Sharp, impeccably dressed, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing, she was one of the department's rising stars. She closed the door, the sound of the city fading away. "I watched the video," she said, her voice a mix of professional concern and something deeper. "The Irene Nage was flawless. You haven't lost a step, Steven. You always were my best student, Eva," Seagal replied, a rare, faint smile touching his lips. The brief warmth evaporated. "This is bad," Rostova said, getting straight to the point. "Kovic is a symptom of a disease I've been trying to cut out for 3 years. He's part of a unit. Officially, it was disbanded. Unofficially, it's called the Aegis program." She explained it was a shadow unit of officers who saw themselves as above the law, protected by a network of influence and a code of silence. "They're ghosts. We know they exist, but we've never had a public, undeniable event to galvanize action. Until now. You need more than a video," Seagal stated. "We need a map of their network," Rostova agreed. "And for that, I need you to meet someone." 30 minutes later, they were in the data-heavy office of Benjamin Carter, a civil rights attorney who looked more like a Silicon Valley coder than a lawyer. Massive screens covered one wall, displaying complex data visualizations and network charts. Carter, energetic and relentlessly focused, didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Mr. Seagal, I'm a huge admirer," Carter began, gesturing to a screen filled with case numbers and statistics. "For 2 years, I've been tracking Aegis through data. Excessive force complaints that vanish. Body cam footage that mysteriously corrupts. A statistical pattern of abuse that is too coordinated to be random. I have the what, but I've been missing the who and the how. You just kicked the anthill. Now we can see who comes scurrying out." Carter's data pointed to a key node in the network, a former officer named David Chen. "Chen was a good cop," Carter explained. "He filed a report against his Aegis-affiliated partner. A week later, his career was ruined, his family was threatened, and he disappeared. If he's alive, he has proof." Finding a man who didn't want to be found was Seagal's specialty. Using old-school deductive reasoning and a few discreet calls to trusted contacts from his past, Seagal bypassed the digital noise. He didn't look for Chen, he looked for the quiet spaces a man like Chen would seek. 2 days later, he was knocking on the door of a rundown motel room in a forgotten corner of the county. The man who opened the door was a shadow of the officer in the file photos. David Chen was thin, pale, his eyes constantly darting. The room was bare except for a laptop and a bag. "They'll kill you for being here," Chen whispered, his voice hoarse. "They've already tried to kill your spirit," Seagal countered, his presence filling the small, desperate space with an unexpected sense of calm. "They failed." Seagal didn't pressure him. He sat and shared a bottle of water, speaking not of justice or revenge, but of reclaiming what was taken. After an hour of near silence, Chen finally opened his laptop. He slid it across the table. "I was saving this for my funeral," he said, a flicker of defiance returning to his eyes. It's a hard drive. It has their training protocols, internal comms, their playbook. It's the key. The encrypted hard drive was more than a key, it was a weapon. With Carter's tech team decrypting the files and Rostova providing classified departmental context, the inner workings of the Aegis program began to bleed into the light. The most critical files detailed communications between Aegis field commanders and their primary political patron, Senator Wallace, a tough-on-crime hawk who sat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's their top cover, Rostova said, pointing to a redacted document. He protects them, and in return, they act as his private army for political wet work. We need to cut the head off the snake. The plan was audacious. They would use the decrypted files to set a trap. Carter's team crafted a carefully worded leak and sent it through dark web channels known to be monitored by Wallace's staff. The message was simple: a disgruntled Aegis member was about to sell the program's entire unredacted operational history to a foreign news agency. An offer to negotiate was extended. The bait was taken. A meeting was set for midnight at a derelict port warehouse in San Pedro, a place of rust, shadows, and the lonely cry of gulls. The team wired the location with covert cameras and audio. Seagal, dressed in black, stood alone in the cavernous space, a solitary figure under a single, flickering industrial light. He was the bait. At precisely 12:08 a.m., a black sedan with tinted windows rolled to a silent stop outside. Senator Wallace emerged, flanked by two men whose tailored suits did little to hide their military bearing. They moved with the synchronized efficiency of a professional security detail. "Mr. Seagal," Wallace began, his voice smooth and condescending as he walked into the light. "A man of your talents. I'm surprised to see you involved in something so pedestrian." "Justice is never pedestrian, Senator," Seagal said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. Wallace chuckled. "Justice? Justice is a concept. Order is a reality. Aegis provides that reality. We do the dirty, necessary work that keeps this country safe while people like you sleep soundly. You should be thanking us." It was a classic villain's monologue, delivered with the absolute conviction of a man who believed his power made him right. "Order built on fear is just tyranny with a budget," Seagal stated flatly. The senator's smile vanished. "You've become a problem. And problems," he said, giving a subtle nod to his men, "need to be solved." The two bodyguards moved simultaneously, reaching inside their jackets. They were fast, but Seagal was faster. He flowed forward, not meeting force with force, but redirecting it. He disarmed the first man with a devastatingly simple wrist lock, sending the pistol skittering across the floor. He used the man's body as a shield, spinning him into his partner and using a precise leg sweep to send them both crashing into a stack of corroded steel drums. The entire engagement lasted less than 5 seconds. It was a blur of controlled, purposeful violence. Before Wallace could react, the warehouse was flooded with light. The massive roll-up doors slammed open, and a team of federal agents led by a grim-faced Eva Rostova stormed in, weapons raised. "Senator Wallace," Rostova announced, her voice ringing with authority as she held up her badge. "You're under arrest. Everything you've said has been recorded." Wallace's face, a moment ago so full of arrogant power, twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He stared at Seagal, who hadn't moved from the center of the room. The trap had sprung. Senator Wallace, stripped of his power and facing a mountain of evidence, crumbled during his first interrogation. He gave up the name they were all waiting for, the true architect of the Aegis program, Marcus Thorne. Thorne was not a politician or a cop. He was a ghost in the system, a former high-level DoD strategist who had privatized the art of control. Now the CEO of a global security firm, he had designed Aegis as a product, a franchise of state-sanctioned corruption that he sold to police departments under the guise of predictive enforcement solutions. He was a merchant of fear, and business was booming. News of Wallace's arrest sent a shockwave through Thorne's network, but he didn't panic. He retaliated. The next day, a courier delivered a plain envelope to Seagal's private residence. Inside was a single, high-resolution photograph. It was of his 14-year-old goddaughter, walking out of her school, a crosshair digitally superimposed over her heart. The message was clear and cold: back off. The threat changed everything. This was no longer just about justice, it was personal. In the team's secure war room, the mood was grim. "He's trying to put you on the defensive," Carter said, his fingers flying across a keyboard. "So we attack." The plan shifted from a legal strategy to all-out digital warfare. Carter's team launched a surgical strike on Thorne's financial empire. They didn't steal money, they introduced chaos, leaking information about his illegal offshore shell corporations to international financial regulators. Stock prices for his public-facing companies plummeted. Alarms blared across his network. They created a fire so large that Thorne would have no choice but to run for the exit. Within hours, intelligence confirmed their theory. A private jet owned by one of Thorne's holding companies was being fueled at a remote, private airfield in the Mojave Desert. Thorne was bugging out. As the sun bled across the desert horizon, a federal response team descended on the airfield, securing the perimeter in absolute silence. Seagal, dressed for battle, stepped out of an armored SUV. He waved off the tactical team. "He's mine." He entered the cavernous hangar alone. Marcus Thorne stood near the steps of his Gulfstream jet, holding a briefcase. He was an impeccably dressed man in his late 60s, with the pale skin of someone who lived his life in climate-controlled offices and the dead eyes of a shark. "The dinosaur himself," Thorne said, his voice a dry, academic rasp. "I should have had you removed first. A miscalculation." "You built a system that preys on the weak," Seagal said, closing the distance. "I built a system that works," Thorne corrected him, with no hint of remorse. "Society is a machine. Some parts are simply more expendable. Security is a product, and fear is the most effective marketing tool. It's simple economics." As he spoke, two of his elite guards emerged from the shadows behind a stack of crates. They were the best money could buy. "You speak of sacrifice," Seagal said, his eyes never leaving Thorne's. "But you never get your own hands dirty." The guards moved in. The fight was brutally short. Seagal met the first with a bone-jarring block and a series of rapid strikes to nerve clusters, incapacitating him instantly. The second came at him with a knife, but Seagal flowed around the attack, trapping the arm and ending the threat with a throw that sent the man crashing hard against the jet's landing gear. Thorne watched, his composure finally cracking. He tried to board the jet, but Seagal was there, blocking his path. "I'm not saving my reputation," Seagal said, pinning Thorne against the fuselage with a hand on his chest. "I'm saving all the people you marked as expendable." The hangar doors burst open, and the federal team swarmed in. As they slapped the cuffs on Marcus Thorne, the architect of a nationwide conspiracy, his face was not one of anger, but of cold, calculating annoyance. He had not been defeated by a hero, he had been undone by a variable he failed to properly quantify. The capture of Marcus Thorne was not the end, it was the beginning of the real war. The data seized from his briefcase and private servers was a Pandora's box, revealing that the Aegis doctrine was far more insidious than they had imagined. It wasn't just a rogue program, it was a virus that had been seeded into police departments in dozens of cities nationwide and was being exported internationally as a model for population control. Inside the DOJ's secure operations room, the team faced a stark choice. They could spend years prosecuting individual cases, or they could burn the whole system to the ground. "We release everything," Seagal said, his voice leaving no room for debate. "All of it. The training manuals, the contracts, the target lists, the surveillance videos. No more secrets. No more shadows." Alexis and Rostova agreed. They called it Operation Final Light. They coordinated with a global network of trusted journalists, civil rights groups, and hacktivists. On a designated day, at a designated hour, they would unleash the truth simultaneously across every major news network and social media platform on the planet. As the hour approached, Seagal sat before a single camera against a plain black background. There was no script, no production. He just spoke, his voice calm and unshakable, a force of nature in its own right. If you're watching this, you already feel that something is wrong. You've seen justice sold to the highest bidder and power used as a weapon against the innocent. They want you to believe you are helpless. They are wrong. Justice doesn't belong to men like Marcus Thorne. It belongs to you. But you have to be willing to fight for it. This isn't the end of their corruption. It is the beginning of our accountability. Demand truth. Stand for what is right. And if they try to bury that truth again, he leaned slightly closer to the camera, his eyes burning with intensity, we will dig it back up. Every single time. At 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the data bomb detonated. The world watched, horrified and galvanized. From Chicago to Seattle, from London to Seoul, the evidence of the Aegis Doctrine sparked outrage and peaceful, powerful protests. Whistleblowers, once silenced by fear, flooded DOJ hotlines with new testimony. The empire Thorne had built crumbled in the light. Days later, the storm had not passed, but its nature had changed. It was now a storm of reform, of indictments, of change. Seagal returned to his dojo, a place of quiet and discipline. Taped to the glass door was a small, handwritten note on a piece of notebook paper. You didn't just fight for us. You reminded us we were worth fighting for. He read the note, his expression unreadable. Then he opened the door and stepped inside, the weight of the world a little lighter on his shoulders. The battle was won. They tried to silence a man who refused to break. He didn't just fight back, he ignited a revolution of truth. What do you think about systems like Aegis? Comment with your thoughts below and show some respect for the real-life whistleblowers who risk everything. Like and subscribe for more stories where justice is served.